Welcome to the MSU Deer Labs online seminar series brought to you by the Mississippi State University Extension Service and the Forest and Wildlife Research Center. My name is Bronson Strickland. I will be your presenter today, and I'm the St. John Family Professor of Wildlife Management and co-director of the MSU Deer Lab. Let's visit this figure again, the antler growth curve. This is what the growth curve should look like. If you were to walk away, the buck population was never harvested, this is the type of growth that you should see. But instead, when we're working with clubs that are frustrated, a land manager, group of hunters, they're really frustrated in that they cannot seem to figure out what's going on with why aren't we harvesting mature bucks that are scoring greater than what they have in the past. Again, we look at the harvest data and we look at the 3.5-year-old bucks they're harvesting. Well, what you would expect under normal circumstances, their 4.5-year-old bucks should be larger on average. Their 5.5 and greater bucks should be larger on average. But instead, on these properties, more or less, they're not seeing much of an increase past 3.5 years of age. And so hopefully from the previous slides I've shown you, maybe you have some idea as to what's going on here. What Steve and I have termed it is the buck management's glass ceiling. There's this limit here once you get to 3 and 4 years of age where you just can't break through that ceiling. It's glass, you can see through it. You don't know what the barrier is, but you can't seem to get beyond it. And so that is what we have called time and time again. It's the buck management glass ceiling. Okay, I'm going to walk you through a simulation to show you exactly how this happens. Luckily, we're so fortunate at the MSU Deer Lab that we have a captive herd, and we are able to take the antler dimensions every single year on these bucks, and so the data I'm going to show you here is using, actual antler data from bucks at 3 and 4 and 5 years of age. And what we're going to do is a simulation. We're going to simulate a deer harvest where we had an antler regulation of a buck has to score greater than 125 inches. So any buck that scores in the 130s or more is eligible for harvest. And let's assume here that most of them are going to get harvested. And let's watch how this plays out. So again, we are simulating a very typical scenario where a hunting club has said, any buck, we're trying to protect young bucks, we're trying to only harvest bucks that are mature, and we're going to set an antler regulation of 125 inches. You are welcome to harvest any buck that scores greater than 125. And here is what happens. So at 3 years of age, now we're going to split these deer up, okay? We're going to keep that same group of bucks that we had at 3.5 years of age, and we're going to act like we didn't harvest any of them at all. And look at what happens to the average antler size of that group of 3.5-year-old bucks at 4 years of age and then at 5 years of age. So the average of that group is now scoring over 150 inches. So what happened here in this high-graded population? Well, right here we removed, remember, all the bucks that scored greater than 125 inches. We turned right around and we did it again at 4 years of age, just like would occur out on the landscape. We removed them again, and then what are we left with? We are left with the bucks that were below average at 3.5. They were below average at 4.5. And now we have a below average cohort of bucks at 5 years of age. That ends up being a 27-inch difference in those two scenarios. So just to emphasize here, the best bucks were removed. The bucks that had the potential to end up here, they were removed at 3.5 and again at 4.5, and then we're left with this flat line. We're left with staying under this buck management glass ceiling here. Okay, for comparison now, let's look at just the opposite. Here is our population average. This is where we did nothing. This is our glass ceiling. This is where we high graded. We removed the best bucks at 3. We removed the best bucks at 4, and this is what we're left with at 5. Let's do just the opposite. Let's remove the lower quality bucks, the ones with the least potential for antler development at 3 years of age and at 4 years of age. Look at what we're left with. We have an average of over 170 inches. And now we're looking at about a 50-inch difference there. We didn't do anything to genetics. We didn't change anything. All we did was determine which bucks should be harvested and which bucks should be allowed to grow to maturity. Let's go from a simulation to a real-world example. This is a hunting club in the Mississippi Delta, unnamed to protect the guilty. This is an example of their harvest data. So again, no simulation here. This is the real deal. This is the average antler size of harvested bucks at 2 years of age, and 3 and 4 and 5. Notice here, instead of the antler size progressing like this, we have a straight line. So immediately we know what's going on. We know what the problem is. Now let's do something. Let's project the bucks that were harvested at each age class. If they possessed the same growth curve like we've talked about time and time again, from 2.5 to 3.5, 3.5 to 4.5, etc. If they grew at the average rate, what would those bucks that were harvested at 2 and at 3, what would they have been at maturity? So this is the actual harvest data. It's just compressed a little bit because I changed the y-axis here. This is again the actual harvest data. This is, in the blue line, the projected score at 5.5 years of age. So those bucks harvested at 2 years of age, if they had been allowed to live to 5 years of age, and if they had, and most of them would, if they had displayed the average growth pattern, look at what those bucks would have ended up as. And pause for a minute and think, why were these 2.5-year-old bucks harvested? Well, look at their antler size for a 2-year-old. That's incredible. You got an average of 115 inches at 2 years of age. My goodness, how important those bucks are from a deer management perspective. So those bucks, you know, they were Boone and Crockett bucks. How about these 3.5-year-old bucks that were harvested? Again, the average is 130 inches. Those bucks scored at 3.5. Well, there's your 160s and your 170s. And then at 4, again, you're not going to see much difference here because they don't have much time to grow. But yeah, those 4.5-year-olds, again, the lower quality, they're the lower quality bucks because they lived to 4. Don't see much difference there. They went from, again, about 130 to about 145. And then of course, no difference here. This is the big deal. This is a big mistake, and that is what causes a lot of buck management programs to fail. Okay, again, this glass ceiling. You've had the benefit of kind of looking behind the scenes with the data, seeing how it happens, but in the real world, how does it happen? Well, kind of what we've seen time and time again is that there are typically 2 types of bucks that a property, a club, a group of hunters is going to classify as a trophy. The first is what you see on the right here. That is what that particular club has been working for. that very rare 150 class, 40 class, 160 class, that's going to vary region to region and based on your expectations and so forth. But that is the type of buck that you're in it for, that you're managing for, that you're working so hard to grow and harvest. And then, for lack of a better term, there's another kind of trophy. There's a shooter trophy. It's not as big as what you want, but it's big enough to shoot. It's big enough to give you some satisfaction that I've killed this buck and he's pretty big, and quite honestly, from a social perspective, nobody is going to give me a hard time about it. I'm not embarrassed by this buck. That shooter category typically is going to set your glass ceiling. You're rarely going to get bucks that survive beyond this size. So think about it. If you were to bring in a 120 class buck, 130 class buck, whatever it is, and people are going to say, hey, that's a real nice buck. Nobody knows the age yet. Nobody knows if strategically it was a good buck to harvest, but everybody's going to say, yeah, that's a pretty good buck. Then that is probably going to be where you have set the glass ceiling on that property. Those shooter trophies, some of those are going to be young. And those are the very bucks that have to be protected if you're going to put more deer, like you see on the right here, more of those on the wall. Some more excuses, again, time and time again, literally face to face, we hear these types of excuses. Well, I really didn't want to harvest that buck, but I just got this new bow and I hadn't killed one with it yet, and it was just a really good bow kill. Or, hey, I just got this new muzzle loader, I just really wanted to try it out, I really wanted to harvest this buck, and it's kind of a size buck I'm proud of, and nobody's going to give me a hard time about it, so I went ahead and harvested it. Well, it was my first buck of the year. I just have to, get one under my belt, and then I'm going to start managing for trophy bucks. I've heard this one. Someone point their finger in my face. We pay too much money not to shoot bucks. That's what we're here for. We gotta shoot these bucks. The list goes on and on. There's always an excuse. There's always a justification, for harvesting these bucks that shouldn't be harvested. Let me say this. There is absolutely nothing wrong with this. It's your property. It's your lease. It's your recreation. Feel free to do that. If you want to harvest that shooter buck with your bow, you go right ahead. That is your prerogative. But why I have that bottom statement in red is there are consequences. So you can't have your cake and eat it too. You can't harvest, I want to get that first buck out of the way, and then I'm going to trophy hunt. What if everybody on the property does that? Think about that. What if everybody gets that good buck, that shooter buck out of the way? Well, you're done for a year. You've harvested probably all the bucks that were going to have potential to grow into that trophy status. They're getting harvested most likely at 3.5 years of age or 4 years of age. And this happens over and over again, and that is where you reach that glass ceiling. Don't shoot high quality young bucks, period. Doesn't matter if you have a new bow, a new muzzle loader, doesn't matter if it's the first buck of the year. This is the most single valuable commodity on your property. This is the investment that you have to make in these 2-year-old bucks and these 3-year-old bucks that have the greatest potential for antler growth at maturity. You've got to do everything in your power to ensure that they make it to maturity. Another good question. What do you do with this buck? There are a lot of different philosophies on that, and most of them, are probably right. What do you do with this buck? Well, it depends. From my perspective, it depends on what are the limitations on your property. If your property is food limited, in other words, we don't have that great of habitat. If you're doing supplemental food plots, by the end of the year, they're browsed down to the ground. if you're harvesting your deer, I'm not even talking about bucks, you're harvesting deer, does, and you're getting to the end of deer season and the condition is not good, they're undersized, they don't have much fat on them, then you have a food limitation problem. You can either the next year work on your habitat, make the habitat carrying capacity greater, but you could also at the same time start taking bucks like this out. And you can start removing them at 3 years of age. So you're doing just the opposite of high grading, where you were taking the best bucks too early. You're taking these bucks out in the middle age classes that don't show promise for being a trophy at maturity. And what you're doing, you're not doing anything for genetics, you're not doing anything whatsoever to improve the genetic composition of the herd. But what you are doing is conserving food, and you're reallocating food to the deer, or the bucks in this case, that you want to see growing to maturity. So when we're asked, should I remove lower quality middle-aged bucks? We don't have a right answer. It depends. It depends on the situation, the context of the property. It depends on the hunters and what they want. Here's a couple criteria you can use though. Is food limited? If food is limited, then this is a viable way to free up some food. On the other hand, if deer at the end of the season, both bucks and does, are they in great condition? Is body size average or above average? Do they have fat on their carcass at the end of deer season? Then you may have plenty of food, and it would be your choice. You can allow those middle-aged, lower quality antler size middle-aged bucks, you can let them grow to maturity if you want. And there's nothing wrong with that at all. There are a lot of people that subscribe to the philosophy of only harvesting mature bucks. And again, that is fantastic. That is a wonderful way to handle the situation. But if food is limited, removing some of those lower quality middle-aged bucks might be a way to free up more food resources. Another is, what are the expectations of the hunters on your property? Are they happy with just harvesting a single buck every year, or a buck every other or third year? If they want to harvest more than that, then, these lower quality middle-aged bucks might be good for them. So they could harvest what we might call a management buck and then also a trophy buck every year. So it always depends. It depends on the context of food and habitat quality, deer density, etc., and then also the desires of the hunters. One thing I like to do is action items. What's an action item for a hunter? And I try to come up with this really simple breakdown here. You're hunting, you're in the woods, out walks a buck. What do you do? I like to go through these steps. Number one, age it. You don't do anything until you know the age or your best estimate of the age of that buck. At that point, it's either going to be, I'm going to protect it, meaning I'm not going to harvest it, or I'm going to select it, meaning I'm going to select it for the purpose of removing it to conserve food, or I'm selecting it for the purpose of, this is what I'm managing for. This is a trophy that I'm proud of, the common goal that our group is all working towards. So age it, number one, and then you're either going to protect it, you're not going to harvest that animal, or you're going to select it for the purpose of it being a management buck, or for the purpose of it being the trophy that you're managing for.